And then after their efforts, I stood up, all right, and I said, Michael Miller Pilates says that there's an ideal within the original work. And that ideal comes, or is based upon three things right out of Joe's book. His definition, his promise, and his sequence. His definition is contrology is the complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit. And the next paragraph says that contrology develops the body uniformly, so that's the promise, like a wedding ring. And then there's the sequence of exercises in the book. And just from those three things, you can achieve an understanding of Pilates as an ideal and as an experience that exists in the body in the moment of the doing. So you're after that experience that you felt, I saw a couple times, when you just get lost in the listening to it, right, and the involvement of it. And to understand Joe's method, it's important to understand that he was a survivor. People often are talking about what he survived in terms of sickness as a kid and incarceration during World War I. But he was tough, and so his conditioning method is a method that's meant to help you to survive. And we do Pilates as survival training, and we do it because of gravity. You never got into any of the gravity stuff, right? Because the reason we do Pilates is to survive in a gravity jungle. Good word, gravity jungle. And the reason it's a gravity jungle is because gravity is a uniform medium, and a fish in water is made of water in water, so it doesn't bear its own weight. I'm sorry about that. And so life in trying to survive has evolved out of the ocean onto land as a means of more odds of survival. But in doing that, we've taken on the weight of our own body. So we need to know how to swim like a fish in an ocean of air. And that's where the promise of uniform development forces you to acknowledge that to get uniform development requires uniform usage. And then now that you know you want uniform usage, like in class today, all of the use your arms kind of things to help even out the load, it takes tension to create uniform usage, and to make tension requires
two endpoints.
Two endpoints, and those endpoints in our body are axes of rotation. And when they rotate in opposite directions, that's what allows us to get the eccentric lengthening. We're talking about you with your endpoint and more connection across the inflection point, which is the true point of eccentricity. And so gravity forces the issue of alignment. Alignment is perceptible via tension. It takes 2 points to trigger uniform usage and sense alignment, right? Because you can't have uniform usage if you're not aligned. And so there's the who Joe was, what it is. There's two definitions, and you covered both of those pretty well. Contrology is and uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. But that the flow through progressive patterns is necessary, because if you don't press the flow, it's really tough to have the listener rise to the occasion and blend completely coordinated with the thinking in the body. Because, see, there's so much, right? And you sort of have to bite at it as it comes to you. Because the complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit, if you don't understand what spirit is, or you don't have a particular take on spirit, then it's just this nebulous spiritual thing. But in Michael Miller Pilates, spirit means
The mind's eye.
The mind's eye. Well, but see, that's distracting because you have the mind in it as a word.
Mm-hmm.
So it means the listener or the observer. Because in addition to thinking, there's observing. And the observer in you, the listener, is not the thinker.
Right.
And the cool thing is that in quantum physics, state-of-the-art physics, you can do an experiment, and if you observe it, it influences the results. So science acknowledges the existence of the observer, but can't define it. because really it exists outside of rationality and thinking, because that's our observer, listener within, God within, or the mind's eye. But the mind's eye confuses mind and body and spirit. And so the key to teaching Pilates, that really is a magic key that makes you different than 95% of the Pilates people that are out there, is when you ask a person to listen to what they feel and to interpret that feeling into judging control or not control and having more control. So as a teacher, if you're just saying do this and do that and you're assessing and it's all about you, the teacher, that's one way. But if the teacher plays like Yoda and sends the client into the cave of their own sensation and says, you have to listen to what you feel, and based on what you feel, take more control, then you're achieving an essence of spirit. That means body, mind, and spirit can be completely coordinated as a state of being in the body in the moment of the doing. Right? And so Joe is a survivor. What is it? There's Joe's definition. There's the definition of the idea. Why? I forgot the why. Who Joe is, why we do Pilates. It's nice to know why you do it before you need to know what it is. Because if you're not motivated to do it, why bother understanding what it is? But we do Pilates to survive in a gravity jungle. And then the two definitions are Joe's and the ideas. And then the big kicker is, why does this matter? Why is Michael Miller Pilates significant in the world of Pilates? Because until Michael Miller Pilates, there was no assertion of an ideal within Joe's original work. And in stating that ideal, when you look at the ideal or the idea of uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement, that comes from Joe. But when you and when you look at all of the tradition, the idea explains the tradition. You understand why the exercises are in the order that they're in, right? And that's a big enough gift at all. Because as a student, if you can understand why it's structured the way it is, it's easier to understand what that structure is. It's easier to understand what traditional Pilates is. And that's a big enough gift to pay the way for wanting to understand. But the real gift is that when you understand why it is the way it is, you can then turn around and teach creatively and appropriately to the body in front of you and still have confidence that you're teaching Pilates. Because, gosh, there's so much Pilates now, and there's new versions. The more you turn around, the more someone would say, okay, now I'm teaching this version of Pilates. It's called Reform Pilates. And it mixes in gyrotonics, and it mixes in stretching and martial arts and this and that, to where, okay, to what is that Pilates? And does Pilates have any essence of its own? And to the extent that you see the ideal that exists within the original work, you can judge for yourself how much of something is Pilates or isn't Pilates. Okay? And so this notion of becoming a Pilates presenter is to pretty much do what I'm just doing here. To go through who is Joe as a survivor and why we do Pilates in terms of surviving in a gravity jungle, and that gets us to uniform usage, right? And then how do we get uniform usage? And tension between endpoints, and then why does any of that matter? Because it helps you understand the original work and then teach creatively in tune with the original work. And in Pewaukee, I had a lady that I was running this by who's a new teacher trainer kind of thing. And we talked about patterns of movement, because in the original work there's flexion before extension, and then side bending before twisting. And that's a progressive pattern, because it starts simple and gets more complex. And after we had our interaction, they brought in one of their clients that had a lot of disc problems and weak and really heavy. And at the end of class, I asked the lady, what did you see? And she said, well, the first thing I saw was you did flexion before you did extension. And I wasn't teaching, Pilates exercises. More was all Cadillac work and whatever I was doing on the Cadillac. But there was that pattern of movement. And so it was gratifying to me to have told her about the pattern and then have her see me implementing it in a lesson that was to such a fragile client. Right? And it's when you have that kind of a understanding in your back pocket about what the ideal nature of Pilates is that allows you to pick the next exercise and have a reason for it. Have a reason why. That goes beyond the list that you absorb through a training program or goes beyond the dogma of a particular style of Pilates, right? Or the orientation of that Pilates. Like if it's physical therapy-based Pilates, and it's all PT-oriented. And to finish up, do you remember Pilates as a two-way street? All right, most of Pilates goes in one direction. You come to Pilates with a background, you learn some Pilates, and then you have a client in front of you that has issues. And so you take everything you know and everything you learned about Pilates toward a client's issues. But heading down that street turns you into a physical therapist. Because physical therapy is all issue-oriented. And yet, there's another direction to go with Pilates, and that's toward the ideal. And the ideal is performing the sequence of exercises in Joe's book. And when you know that ideally what you want to do is achieve contrology as a complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit, and do that through the process of the movements of the mat, then no matter what the body is, with what issues, I'm still trying to teach hundreds, and then the roll-up, and then the rollover, and la-da-da, right? You have a purpose and a direction that isn't fragmenting toward issues, but is headed toward the uniform usage of the body through movement pattern. And when you know that, then you have an essence as a Pilates instructor that isn't PT-oriented, isn't driving you down the direction toward issues, but instead takes you toward the performance of uniform effort. And the irony is, not the irony, but, not the irony, the underlying, what happens is that all the issues that people talk about, as they do Pilates, the issues disappear, right? Because you're using the body uniformly and getting more and more of the body uniformly, the issues have to dissolve into the greater whole and participate so they cease to become issues. So I know what I'm after before I meet anybody. And before they want to confess to what their issues are, I know that I want someday, ideally, for them to be able to hit the mat and press the flow enough to disappear into the effort because their listener is so in tune, they're so listening to what they're doing, they're so present in the moment that their body, mind, and spirit, they hit that mark, they hit contrology. And then you have to modify or whatever to deal with their issues, but their issues aren't the direction of what I'm teaching toward. I'm teaching toward the uniform effort, and the issues disappear. Okay? And see, if you can see it, if you can absorb that, and a lot like catechism, you memorize it at first, so that you have it at hand memorized. The more you have it memorized, then you own it as a memorized thing, the more you can extrapolate and just deliver a more subjective interpretation of that. And I would hope, Jeanette, that I have done what Joe couldn't do. And that is move past being bitter for not being recognized. Because word is that he was pretty disheartened by the end that nobody really saw what he was doing. And for the most part, nobody really sees what I'm doing. There's a few people that absorb it, and yet in their absorbing of it, it's just more stuff compared to all the other stuff they're getting. and they don't really understand the significance of the stuff I'm giving versus whatever else is out there. Because to me, whatever else is out there, if it's only in the tradition of things and interpreting it through dance or yoga or whatever, it's different. How you doing? Good?
Vilma.
Vilma. Michael.
What is it?
Michael. You're Vilma.
I'm Vilma.
I'm Michael.
Michael, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. So,